Memorials to fallen war heroes are always powerful, but especially so on Memorial Day weekend. For years, the fallen from wars like the war in Vietnam and the war in Korea have been remembered on the National Mall and in communities around the country. But what about those who paid the ultimate sacrifice in Iraq or Afghanistan? Well, it turns out building a national memorial is easier said than done. The United States has now been out of Iraq and out of Afghanistan for nearly 2 years. Conflicts that began over 20 years ago. 7,000 plus service members have died in post 9/11 operations. And while across the country in cities like Hermitage, Pennsylvania and Kokomo, Indiana, there are small tributes to the global war on terror, on the National Mall in Washington so far, a national memorial does not exist. Michael Rodriguez, the CEO of the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation, explains why.
We had to seek an exemption from a law that says a war has to be over for a period of 10 years in order for a national war memorial to be built.
Rodriguez says in 2015, he and others began trying to convince lawmakers to change the law, an effort which ultimately resulted in then-President Donald Trump granting an exemption in 2017. 6 years later, though, in Washington, there is still no memorial. Ground has yet to be broken.
And it's an incredibly complex process. The way I describe what we do is I want you to imagine a public piece of civic art that everybody has input on land you cannot buy, with 20 layers of bureaucracy and politics.
Rodriguez tells us, however, that the land has been selected just north of the Lincoln Memorial. But to get approval to use that land, it required another law, which President Biden signed in 2021. To make things even more complicated, Rodriguez says taxpayer money will not be used. $100 million will need to be raised.
I hope everyone understands this is our nation's front lawn. There's a process.
Currently, Rodriguez says they're on steps 13 through 19. An architect is expected to be announced later this summer who will then be tasked with design. While the memorial may be similar in some ways to existing ones, Rodriguez hopes this tribute feels different.
I can name 54 friends of mine that never came home. So I wanted to be able to honor everybody that served.
The goal right now is to formally dedicate the Global War on Terrorism Memorial sometime in 2027, 12 years from the time this process all began. And if you are wondering if all this work for a memorial is worth it, those who were at the Korean War Memorial in Washington recently tell us yes. Sky wasn't alive in the 1950s, but thanks to this place, he's learning about it.
It's horrible history. People died because of the war.
Joe St. George, Scripps News, Washington.